Alright, so in this video I'm going to be talking about negative aesthetics and how those relate to Gothic horror and the vampire in particular. I'm going to be having a look at Fred Botting's introduction to negative aesthetics and talking about how this works within the context of Bram Stoker's seminal vampire novel, Dracula, before comparing that with how this aesthetic functions in a more contemporary vampire text in Anna Lily Amirpour's 2014 vampire western film, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. So firstly, what are negative aesthetics and how do they relate to Gothic horror texts? According to Fred Botting's introduction to negative aesthetics, the Gothic is characterized primarily by absences or negativity. The absence of light, the absence of reason, of knowledge, of safety, and of social order and morality. The settings of classic Gothic texts often harken back to the Dark or Middle Ages, a period that in the Gothic is defined in its opposition to the Enlightenment, generally characterized by a lack of scientific understanding and reason. Instead, it is an age that is rife with superstition and myth. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, we can see this medieval setting when Jonathan travels to Dracula's castle. On his journey, he meets many superstitious villagers, and even the castle and Dracula himself are noted for their incredibly old age. These first few points are all tied up together in creating a kind of dark, tense atmosphere in Gothic texts. Dark nights, strange noises, castle ruins, old superstitions and myth, foreboding landscapes, and imagined dangers all contribute to the overall vibe of the text, the negative aesthetic. Anna Lily Amirpour's 2014 Gothic horror film A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night plays on some of these negative aesthetics and inverts others in her contemporary take on the vampire narrative. Filmed in black and white and set almost entirely at night, there is plenty of darkness, superstition, amorality and lawlessness, though much of this comes from a Hollywood Western aesthetic mixed with a Gothic aesthetic. According to Botting, the Gothic relies heavily on historical settings, usually reminiscent of medieval Europe, to create a sense of myth and danger. Amirpour instead invokes the Wild West as a desolate and dangerous place of lawlessness and vigilante justice. Moving on from setting, landscape and general atmosphere, I want to talk a little bit about the figure of the vampire more specifically and how the dynamic between vampire, victim and the symbolic monstrous functions in each of these texts. Botting notes that the two central figures in the Gothic are usually an older male villain and a young female heroine who both, within the lawless Gothic setting laid out earlier, experience an unusual degree of independence and freedom to act out their desires. For the victim, this freedom goes hand in hand with a lack of safety, creating tension between curiosity, pleasure, and fear, and a sense of danger that is simultaneously thrilling and frightening. The monster in the Gothic can be understood to be symbolic of negative attitudes or social anxieties. By giving shape to a negative attribute, desire, or social threat, the aesthetically unappealing monster allows the hero in the text to condemn and defeat an otherwise amorphous threat. The figure of the vampire in particular is associated with bloodlust and overt sexuality. We can see this dynamic at play in Dracula when Lucy becomes infected after Dracula's bite and her previously embarrassing but ultimately harmless flirting becomes outright sexually aggressive behaviour. Lucy's monstrous transformation in the wake of her vice allows her to be killed off violently and remorselessly, while Mina and Jonathan, who ultimately remain morally virtuous, are saved from such a fate. In A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, Amirpour exploits our expectations around genre tropes, gendered violence, and the villain-victim dynamic. Setting up Saeed as a villain early in the film for his feeding off others' dependency on him, as well as for his sexual violence, Amirpour subverts the dynamic Botting lays out between the older male villain and the young female heroine. In a scene rife with erotic overtones, Amirpour makes Saeed both the villain of the narrative and the victim of the girl's feminist brand of violent vigilante justice. Bram Stoker uses the epistolary form of his novel to create the sense of mystery surrounding Dracula, whose character we must deduce from snippets of other people's writings. Amirpour plays with and subverts genre expectations, creating shock along with dread. But neither of the texts necessarily offers us a satisfying rational explanation for the events unfolding within, relying instead on the atmosphere created by the negative aesthetics in order to elicit emotional responses to supernatural phenomena rather than giving out logical explanation. The lights aren't turned on and the curtain isn't pulled back to reveal the workings of the story. The ambiguity and uncertainty is a large part of how Gothic horror stories work to create a sense of dread. Which brings me back to the quote from the start of the video. Knowledge and understanding do not constitute the primary aim of Gothic texts. What counts is the production of affects and emotions, often extreme and negative.